Good morning. This is episode 27 of Camellia City, a little podcast about the most magical town in the state of Alabama, Greenville, Alabama. And today I just want to enjoy a little bit of the latest quarterly from the Butler County Historical and Genealogical Society. And it's a good one. This is one of the more entertaining ones, and I wanted to share it with you in the hopes that, number one, you will go over to the library on Tuesdays, go into the room back there and join the Historical Society. It's only $18, and you get 4 quarterlies for a year. And you also get invites to some of their programs they do, which are amazing. I'm going to tell you about that in a minute. And it supports, people who are archiving our history. And I can't tell you how precious these people are to our community, and it really helps. And you can pay more than $18, by the way. A lot of people do when they find out, oh, it's $18 to join a year, and then they give a little bit more as just a donation to help with, their work. So just amazing. All right. So I just love getting these quarterlies, but I was really surprised at how good this one is. This one's volume 55, number 2. Yeah. Before I get started, though, there's a couple of things, just timely things I want to share with you, which are, come by my shop, Sweetheart, Alabama, to get Putting on the Ritz tickets. That is coming up this weekend. And it's going to be an amazing show, and I still have tickets for every night, so come by and get those. Also, come see me because I'm just offering a new service at the shop that includes DNA testing to test if you have any of the 98 genes that can marker 25 different cancers, and I can give you info on that. You can take home and read about. All right, so the editor's notes for the Historical Society, there's 2 things coming up you really got to check out. Well, first of all, April 28th is the next meeting, and that's a Sunday, 2 p.m. It's at Greenville City Hall, and I saw the first part of this one, and it's absolutely amazing. Come to see the second part. It's Judge Frank Trippy McGuire will be giving a talk on William Weatherford. William Weatherford is one of the most famous guys in Alabama history. His name's Red Eagle. He's a guy that jumped off the cliff. I think I want to read a couple of books about him. After I saw the first part of the talk, I was just amazed. Apparently, well, first of all, he was like the most handsome man you had ever seen, and people would write about him. Even men would write about how incredibly beautiful he was. And he was athletic and brave and gorgeous. And it's like, to me, he looks like Jason Momoa. But that's only in my imagination. I don't know what he looked like. But come to that, and it's really fun to come and see a talk. They only last about an hour, and it's just something that's really neat that we get to do in our town. Also, on July 28th, mark your calendar, Molly Waters is going to be talking about Butler County cemeteries. And so she's going to be talking about it. You don't have to go to the cemetery. I think this will be a talk at City Hall, and that will be thrilling because, Molly Waters is an amazing presenter and member of the community, and she knows everything there is to know ever about the cemeteries here. So please, please, please come to that also. All right, so I've got so many stories, excuse me, in this quarterly that I hope I get to them all, actually. There's so much going on. Okay. Y'all know how I laugh when it seems like every day somebody brings up the massacre, right? So the massacre happened before Greenville became a town, and that's the massacre, where there's actually two events that happened. One was Savannah Jack killed the two families, and then the other one is when Savannah Jack killed Captain Butler, the guy who our county is named for. And it's just a vicious attack, and y'all know about this. I don't really have to say it. I think it's in another podcast you can listen to. But basically, Savannah Jack was brutal, and Captain Butler was not just killed, he was gutted, and parts of his private parts were cut off and stuck in his mouth. It's terrible. So, and it's worth it to just talk to one of these historical ladies and watch them try to tell you that story, because they're trying to be as Christian as they can when they talk about it, but it is scandalous. Okay, so, but one of the things kind of has to do with that, and that is the murder of William Cogburn, and he was killed by curiosity in 1818, so this is right after the massacre, and this is actually from John Little's 1885 History of Butler County, which is a great book, by the way. In the spring of 1818, shortly after Butler was killed, Captain Butler, the Indians came near Fort Bibb one night and took several horses from Dave Reddock, Thomas Carter, and Josiah Hill, and a good many of Thomas Hill's fine beeves, which were killed and the flesh carried away in sacks. They were pursued by the militia, and a few of the citizens and the horses were tracked southward into the fork of Long Creek, where the Indians were found enjoying their spoils. Discovering the white men first, the savages hid themselves in the thick undergrowth of the swamp and awaited an opportunity for an attack. The captain of the militia threw out a line of skirmishers, succeeded in catching the stolen horses, and began to burn the beef. One of the skirmishes, named William Cogburn, who lived with James K. Benson, got upon a log in order that he might have a better view of the situation, and was commanded by one of the officers to get down. He replied that he was not afraid, but a bullet pierced his heart before he had hardly finished the sentence, and he fell dead upon the ground. The captain rallied his company and attempted to make a charge against the enemy, but not without some difficulty, as a man could not be seen 10 steps in the thick cane and bushes of the swamp, and the men were expecting to be shot down every moment. After firing a few volleys in the direction of the enemy, the company set out for Fort Bibb, carrying with them the dead man and the captured horses. So there you go. Got him quick. And by the way, they don't really know William Cogburn, where he came from. Maybe Mississippi, they're not sure where he fought. He probably was in the Seminole War, and that's how he got to the area, to the Fort Bibb area, in Fort Dale. In fact, there was a William Cogburn who fought in the Seminole War under a Captain Figures who was stationed at Fort Dale. So obviously, these ladies do their research, and that was the great Judy Taylor and the great Annie Crenshaw who presented that. Pretty amazing work. I mean, the stuff that they do, you guys, it's amazing. All right, so next thing, quickly, there was a cycling party in 1896 in downtown Greenville, Alabama, and it was a big deal in the newspaper, y'all, because it happened at night. Scandalous. Last Friday night, and this is from April the 1st, 1896. Last Friday night, the old gentleman up in the moon stirred up his brush heap and furnished plenty of light. A party of merry bicyclists improved the opportunity and went riding around town. Now, first of all, they name all of these people, and there were some old Baptist ladies scandalized by some young people riding their bicycles at night around town. And by the way, it was young ladies and young men. Lord. Okay, here they were. Mrs. Nettie Knight, Nellie Porter, Sally Mae Wimberly, Katie Wimberly, Lily Elbert, Flora Newman, Salome Wilkinson, Lily McKenzie, Isla McDavid, Lily Bell Smith, George Scott. Oh, okay, so those are all the scandalous ladies, hussies. With George Scott, Fowler Timms, Park Smith, Worth Wimberly, Henry Pisrow, Harry Day, John Aramine, Forrest Seal, Frank Daniel, Earl McKenzie, Eldred Stewart, Price McKenzie, C.B. Herbert, J.C. Seal, Jason M. Glenn, 25 in all. A pleasant time was enjoyed by all, whether on the wheels or beholding the moonbeams as they irradiated the earth, wrapped in its mellow splendor. And the party separated with pleasant anticipation of other similar occasions. What is the world coming to? Just young people out riding their bicycles at night, unaccompanied. Okay, so here's the main story I want to get to today. This is the story of John Henry Johnson. And it's a serious story of arson, manslaughter, prison, and parole. And this is taken from the John Henry Johnson story that was put together in 2012 and 2017. So this has been a family story that has been put together over the years. And I just want to read you what Joey Blackman wrote about it. This is a story of a 51-year-old prosperous farmer whose world was turned upside down after a cross-cut saw injury. He went insane, burned down his family's church, threatened the minister, his own brother-in-law, with a gun, and fatally wounded a deputy sheriff who was trying to serve an arson warrant. Tried for first-degree murder, John received a manslaughter conviction and 15-year prison sentence. His two daughters, Katie and Maggie, were tried as accessories to murder, but were found not guilty and released. This is a crazy story. I mean, literally a crazy story. So, we're also going to talk later about the police officer, the sheriff's deputy who was murdered. All right, so I'm going to try to get through this. Hopefully we have enough time. So this John Henry Johnson was born July 4th, 1852. He was born in Coffee County, though. When he was a young man, he moved to Mount Olive in the southwest corner of Butler County. At age 22, he married Amanda Elizabeth Owen, whose family lived nearby. She was born September 25th, 1859, and was the daughter of Benjamin Franklin Owen and Elizabeth Marsh. And she was not quite 16 years old when she and John married. According to his own autobiography, which he wrote in 1933, in the first part of their married life, he worked with Gideon Peagler on Cedar Creek, where their first child was born. He and Amanda moved from the Peagler place to a home site near Mount Olive, where their second child was born. And then a little later, John Henry homesteaded 80 acres and settled at the place where he would stay until his death. It was there in the Till community, 10 miles east of Georgiana, that a third child was born in a little pole cabin that they lived in. So they had 3 children. After 6 years of marriage, though, Amanda was only 22 and she died of typhoid fever. According to the story handed down through her son, Joe, Amanda's dying request to her sister-in-law Elizabeth was, quote, "Liz, bring my 3 boys and let me kiss them goodbye, and you see that they meet me in heaven." And she was laid to rest at Mount Olive East Cemetery in Butler County. So 2 years after she dies, John Henry Johnson remarries Rachel Emma Daly. And in Lowndes County. John was 31 and she was 28. And she was the child of Elijah Daly and Barbara Ellen Catherine Arendt. So in his biography, he writes about his second wife, Emma. She was another one of those calm, sweet-tempered women the Lord seemed to be holding in reserve for me. It was such a sweet day for me when I brought her in and made her the queen of my home. I almost fancied that my troubles were all behind me. Blech. Sorry. Okay, John and Emma had 5 daughters. They had 5 daughters: Katie Bell, Maggie M., Sally L., Ellie J., and Annie Elizabeth. And they raised their girls in the Teal community, which is also called Mount Pleasant, after the church, by the way. And so this little area really grew, and it's at the intersection of County Road 48, Mount Pleasant Road, and 45, Mackenzie Grade Road, in southwestern Butler County. John served as a deacon in the Mount Pleasant Baptist Church. In the church history, written in 1988, by the way, he's listed as a committee member and described as one of the first church members. Quote, "It was in the fall of the year September 22nd, 1888, that our 4 families came together to organize Mount Pleasant Baptist Church. What better time and what better purpose under heaven than to have a place to worship God, provide spiritual leadership, and promote Christian growth in this small rural community. The seed was planted by W.H. Joyner, J.H. Johnson, D.G. Teal, and B.T. Thomas. Together with their families, they make up the 10 charter members who took part in organizing Mount Pleasant Baptist Church 100 years ago. John, with his wife and children, was listed in the Mount Olive community of the Butler County 1900 census. He was the census enumerator himself and was obviously a respected member of the community. He was a farmer. He owned his own home. He could read and write. His mother, Louisa, lived with them, and his older children were all attending school. Everything's looking good for John, right? But here's where the trouble started. Not long after that census, John cut his knee badly with a saw and became crippled. And this is what he wrote about it. Near Christmas, some 30 years ago, while sawing wood with a crosscut saw, I accidentally stuck a tooth in my knee, from which blood poison set up, which caused me a long spell of intense pain and suffering. For more than 4 months, I lay, as it were, battling between life and death. And during this time of untold pain and misery, my friends and relatives were earnestly praying for me that I might get well. And as I overheard these prayers, I too was praying that if the Lord would let me get well, that without fear or favor, the remainder of my life I'd spend in His service. At last, the glad day came when I could get on crutches and get on the land, the most happy man on earth. And now the question, have I repaid my vow? Frequently haunts me. To the best of my ability, I think I have, though the evidence is against me in many cases." Okay, so his own son wrote this in 1904. He was interviewed in the 1904 Greenville Advocate about this, And this is his son speaking about him. "All this trouble could be ascribed to an injury which his father received some years ago while sawing logs. He was sawing near the ground, and in some manner his feet slipped, causing him to fall upon his knees. Just at that time he pulled the saw towards him, causing one of the saw teeth to enter the knee joint, releasing some of the synovial or lubricating fluid. For 100 days he suffered the most intense pain, and finally his mind collapsed to the incessant strain. Whatever the cause, John's mental health deteriorated. His agitated behavior alarmed his family, and after consulting with local doctors and with the Butler County probate judge Zale Gaston, they had John admitted to Bryce Hospital in Tuscaloosa in November of 2002. His medical records give the duration of his illness before admission as 3 months and his mental disorder as paranoia. So they've sent him off to Bryce. This is not a good sign already, right? A letter dated from March of '03 from William W.H. Joyner, who was John's brother-in-law, asked Dr. J.T. Searcy at the hospital to discharge John, who had been furloughed home for a few days earlier. Reverend Joyner wrote that John had, quote, improved a great deal and seems to be all right now. John was not discharged until September of '03, however, when doctors believed that his treatment had had good results. His family had petitioned repeatedly to have him released and allowed to come home. So John was released from Bryce, but dun-dun-dun, all was not well. On Wednesday, June 8, 1904, in a, quote, confused state of mind, as reported in the Greenville Advocate, John Henry Johnson burned down Mount Pleasant Baptist Church. Local residents said that John was upset over boundaries of land donated for the church. He had trouble with several church members and had made threats. His actions were reported to law enforcement, and 2 warrants were sworn out against John on June 9, 1904, one for arson and burning the church, and the other for presenting a gun on Reverend W.H. Joyner, the Baptist minister, who was also his brother-in-law. So he's burned down the damn church. And he's pulled a gun on his brother-in-law, the pastor. The warrants were signed by Judge Ramage, stated that Reverend Joyner had probable cause for believing that John H. Johnson, quote, willfully set fire to or burned, to wit, a church house known as Mount Pleasant Church. On June 10th, the next day, deputies came to arrest John, and this is John's version of what happened. Quote, as I was coming in from work, hot and tired, at my gate I met a posse of men armed, as it were, for war. They had come for me, and now is when and where the most awful part of my story begins. It is when and where I was first branded as a murderer. I resisted the officer, and a battle ensued between myself and daughters and the officials, and as a result of said battle, George Bryan received a fatal shot in the stomach, and I, with a policeman's club, was knocked senseless. When I came to my senses, I found that I had a broken arm and a good long split in my head. Another view of the events, however, were recorded in an interview with Deputy Oliver Bryan, the brother of the fatally wounded officer, George Bryan, and this is from the Greenville Advocate, okay, in 1904. When, quote, when we arrived at the house of Johnson, which is 15 miles southeast of Greenville, he was not at home. Sheriff Hartley and George had ridden past the house about 40 yards and halted. I asked a lady who lived in that house there, and she said Johnson. I asked if he was home, and she said he was in the field plowing. I expected to go and hunt him, but just then he rode up, passing the sheriff and brother George, speaking to them pleasantly. He came onto the gate and spoke to me. I told him to hold on, and he said he would as soon as he got down, and he had a plow stock on his shoulder. I offered to help him down with the stock, but he threw it to the ground and got off his horse the opposite side from me and started for the gate. I took hold of him and told him that I was a sheriff and that I had a warrant for him. He tried to get away from me, and it was all I could do to hold him. In the scuffle, I got him down on his hands and knees. By that time, he had got out a long dirk and was doing his best to stab me. He did succeed in cutting a gash in my coat and making small wounds in my hands and arms. He succeeded in getting on his feet then, and about that time, Brother George ran up and took hold of one of his hands. Johnson then shouted for a gun. One of his daughters ran out with a single-barrel gun, and another came out and got a short piece of plank, and with that she struck Brother on the head, knocking him loose from Father. So these girls were in on it. With his free hand, Johnson then pulled his pistol, and while in his half-bent position, shot Brother 2 or 3 times, 2 balls entering his abdomen. The girl with the gun tried to shoot, but as there was danger to her father, she hesitated a moment when the sheriff had caught hold of the gun and took it away from her. With it, he struck Johnson on the arm, breaking it near the wrist, and he hit a blow to the head sufficiently hard to fell him to the ground. The sheriff jumped on him and held him until we could put on the handcuffs. Brother, after he was shot, struck Johnson with the policeman's club, knocking the pistol from his left hand, and the sheriff was striking the right arm of the hand, of which was the dirk, and that he was trying so desperately to use on me. The girls were doing all the fighting in their power, using anything they could get their hands on. While we were securing the prisoner, we had to keep off the girls at the point of a pistol. And we had succeeded in securing Johnson. Some of the neighbors had come up, and the women of the family began to abuse them and struck one of them, a cousin, with a breast chain. Whew. So, quite a fight happened. And so the sisters, we find out, are not going to be charged, but maybe they should have been, So here was the report of the officer who ends up dying. George Bryan passed away at 6:50 last Wednesday evening. Sheriff Hartley went to the jail and told Mr. Johnson of Mr. Bryan's death and the feeling against him. He informed him, however, that he intended to do all in his power to ensure his safety, because you know what's going to happen. Once the report of the officer, being killed, there's going to be a lynch mob. A lynch mob's coming. And we have a history of this in this county, FYI. I mean, we did hang a dead man. We got out of the jail, okay? And told him to dress and be prepared to go with him without making any fuss. A few minutes later, Johnson was ready and walked out of the jail with Sheriff Hartley without saying a word. He got into a carriage with Mr. Will Routon and was taken to Fort Deposit. The following morning, he was conveyed to Montgomery and lodged in the county jail. You know why? So that they could keep the lynch mob from getting him. At midnight Wednesday night, a posse of citizens led by Sheriff Hartley went to Till for the purpose of arresting the wife and 2 daughters of Johnson, who were charged with being accessories to the murder of Mr. Bryan. A messenger from a neighbor's house was dispatched to inform the women that the officers were there to take them, and that if they would surrender quietly, they would not be harmed. One of them, Johnson's sons, came out and said they were willing to go and asked for a little time in which to get ready. There was no attempt to resist. Wow. So, John Henry Johnson was a troubled man. Not only had he been arrested and imprisoned for arson and physical violence, but now the man whom he had shot in their scuffle was dead, and his wife and 2 of his daughters had also been arrested. So, in the next quarterly, they're going to explain what happens in the court case and the rest of the story of Mr. Johnson. It's quite scandalous, and was he insane at the time? What was going on, and why did the daughters fight so hard? Oh my goodness. Okay, so this is part of our history, and what an amazing story it is. It's not too late to get your own quarterly that would be, in fact, if you pay for the year, you'll get all the quarterlies that have happened so far. And you can also make donations to get other quarterlies if you like. Right now, you could talk to Judy Taylor and ask her specific things, and sometimes she remembers anything that your family might have to do. There might be mentioned in a quarterly, and she can pull that quarterly for you. What a great resource our historical society is. And no, they're not on Facebook. No, you can't pay online. There are some things that might change one day, but right now, let's just go with it and try to support any way we can. Thank you guys so much for listening. I love you much, and like I said, come see me for those Putting on the Ritz tickets, and I'll see you on the next episode of Camellia City. Mwah! Love you. Bye.